everybody. Hope you're doing well. Coming at you from West Virginia. Doesn't it look like it? Anyways, so joke of the day. Although the invention of the shovel was groundbreaking and the invention of the broom truly swept the nation, it was the invention of the wheel that really got things rolling. And speaking of rolling, let's roll into our topic of discussion. So we're going to take a look at the introduction to counting methods. And introduction to counting methods is going to allow us to work with setting up sample spaces, and that's going to lead us into the ability to take a look at probability. So the idea of counting methods, we first need a couple of definitions. The first definition is the idea of with repetition. If something is allowed to be repeated, or if repetition is allowed, then that means the objects that are being used are allowed to be used more than once. So in other words, if I take a book off a shelf and I put it back on the shelf so that I can select it again, that means the object is allowed to be used more than once, so repetition is allowed in that situation. On the flip side of that is the idea of without repetition. Without repetition is exactly the opposite of that. In other words, the objects are not allowed to be used more than once. So in the example of the book on the shelf, what that means is I take the book off the shelf, I am not allowed to put the book back on the shelf to be used again. So repetition is not allowed in that case. This is very important when we are creating sample spaces and trying to decide how many options or how many combinations we can make in a situation. So let's say, for example, that I'm making a sandwich. And to make that sandwich, I've got 4 meats to choose from. So let's say that I can choose between ham, salami, turkey, and roast beef. Excuse me. So those are the 4 meats that I can select. Now I've got 4 examples that we're going to work through in this situation just to see how repetition works and how repetition or not allowing repetition works and how order makes a difference in creating it. So in the first example that we're looking at, it says that we're going to list all the ways that I can select 2 meats. Now I've got 4 to choose from, but I'm going to select 2 meats in making my sandwich. And I'm being told that when I select these 2 meats, order does not matter. Now what that means is, say for instance I select a ham and then the next meat that I choose is salami. So in other words, I'm making my sandwich, I put ham down here and then I stack salami on top of that. Now if order does not matter, then that means ham down here, salami up here is the same thing as salami down here and ham up here, because the flavor is going to be the same no matter what. So if order does not matter, then the way I select them makes no difference at all. It's all the same. But this says repetition is not allowed. So in other words, when I select that ham lunch meat to put on my sandwich, I cannot double up the meat. Because you know that whenever we make pizzas, for instance, you can get double meats and stuff like that. But in this case, if repetition is not allowed, I cannot double up my meat. So if I select ham, I have to choose one of the other 3 choices. I cannot select ham again. So in this case, because order does not matter, repetition is not allowed, then what that means is when I select ham, like I said, I cannot select ham again, but certainly I can select salami. But salami first, ham second is the very same thing. So I'm not even going to consider that. But I could choose ham and I could choose turkey. However, flipping that around, this has ham on the bottom, turkey up here, but turkey on the bottom, ham up here means the very same thing. So I don't need to consider that one. I also could choose ham and roast beef, but again, ham first, roast beef second is the same thing as having the roast beef first and the ham second. So what I've done here is I've exhausted all options using the ham. Now I'm going to move on to, what if I select salami to be my first meat there on the bottom? Now if I select salami to be my first meat on the bottom, I can choose ham next, but remember, ham salami is the same thing as salami ham. So I'm not even going to consider that one. But I can choose salami and then I can choose turkey next. That's a whole new sandwich to me. Or I can choose salami and I can choose roast beef. That exhausts all my options with salami. Now I can move on and say, what if I choose turkey to be the first meat that's on there? So if I choose turkey to be the first meat, then if I choose turkey and I go grab that ham next, now remember, turkey ham is the same thing as ham turkey, and we've already mentioned that, so I can't mention it again. But what if I select ham and then I choose salami next, because it's the second meat listed? Well, turkey salami, remember, is the same thing as salami turkey, and that's already been mentioned, so I cannot use that one. But what if I do turkey and then roast beef? That's a whole new sandwich to me. So that's an option there, and that exhausts all the options with turkey. Now, roast beef is my next selection, but if I choose roast beef and repetition is not allowed, then that means that roast beef would combine with ham, but I've already done that right here with ham roast beef. Roast beef can combine with salami, but I already did that right here. And roast beef can combine with turkey, but I already did that right here. So here's all the options that I have for selecting two meats, and order not mattering and repetition not being allowed. So I've got 2, 4, 6 options here, or 6 combinations that can be made. Now, in terms of what would I report for my answer, the question actually says list all those combinations. So honestly, this is not what I would list as my answer. The list itself is what I would list. So these 6 options here are what I would list as my answer. Okay, so let's take a look at another situation where we're going to flip it around now and literally flip our board. This is the super coolest board I've ever seen. And so now in this situation it says let's list all the ways that I can still make my sandwich and still select 2 meats, but this time order doesn't matter, repetition is allowed. So if order doesn't matter, remember that means that ham salami is the same thing as salami ham, it's all the same, but repetition is allowed. So in other words, when I select that ham, I can double the meats. So let me just list up here. We had, my options were ham, salami, turkey, and roast beef, just so that I can remember. So now I'm going to select ham first. But remember, double the meats is okay because repetition is allowed. So I can choose ham, and then I can double that meat and do ham, ham. Or I could choose ham, and then I could select salami. And then I could do ham and say, let's pick turkey with that. And I could say, well, let's choose ham and let's add roast beef to that. So I have exhausted all the options here with ham. So now let's change it up and let's say, well, let's say I choose salami first. Well, if I choose salami first, well, I could go salami and grab that ham. But remember, order does not matter. So salami ham is the same thing as ham salami. I already mentioned that one, so I'm not going to mention it again. But what if I select salami and I double my meats? So I've got salami, salami. What if I choose salami and I go with turkey next? Well, that hasn't been mentioned, so that's an okay option. What if I choose salami and then the next thing is roast beef? That as well has not been mentioned, so that's an option. And that exhausts everything in the salami category. So now what if I go, okay, let's pick turkey to be my bottom layer of my sandwich. So if I choose turkey next, then I can go, I can say, well, let's grab that ham to be my next one. But remember, turkey ham is the same thing as ham turkey. It's already been mentioned, so I'm not going to mention it again. But what if I do turkey and I grab salami next? Well, turkey salami is the same thing as salami turkey. It's already been mentioned. I don't need to mention it again. But remember, I can double my meats. So I can have turkey, turkey, that's okay. Or I could do turkey and then put roast beef on it. That's a totally new type of sandwich that hasn't been mentioned before. And that exhausts everything with turkey. Now moving on to roast beef, I can say, okay, let's let roast beef be that bottom layer, pick it first. What if I grab ham to put on top of that? But roast beef ham is the same thing as ham roast beef, and it's already been mentioned here. What if I do roast beef and then grab that salami? Well, roast beef salami is the same thing as salami roast beef, already been mentioned. What if I do roast beef and grab turkey? Roast beef turkey is the same thing as turkey roast beef, already been mentioned, don't need to mention it again. But remember, repetition is allowed, so double the meats is okay. Roast beef is perfectly fine. And so the directions said list all the ways. Well, I've listed them all right here, which gives me a total of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 ways that I can make that sandwich. So now let's take a look at another situation. This one says I'm still making a sandwich. I'm still using the same meats that are listed up here. I'm still going to select 2, but this time order does not matter. Still doesn't matter. Repetition is allowed, which is exactly what we did right there. So I need to change that up. Oh, order does matter. Okay, let me switch this. Pardon me. Forgive me for the mistake here. But I'm certainly glad I caught it because it would be the exact same question. That would be bad. All right, order does matter. So if order does matter, then what that means is, then this is now the same thing as that. Okay. Oh, forgive me. Okay, let's get this cleaned up here. Repetition is not allowed. Okay. There we go. So, here we go. 2 meats. Order does matter. So if order matters, then that means when I select ham and then I put salami on top of that, totally different sandwich than salami here, ham here. Flavor's the same to me, but the order is going to matter to this particular individual. But repetition is not allowed, so double the meats is not okay. So I can start with ham, and I can say, okay, let's put salami on top of that. Repetition is not allowed, double the meat's not okay. But I can say, let's do ham and let's put turkey on top of that. Or I could say, let's do ham and put roast beef on top of that. And this is all my options with the ham. Now let's move on to saying, let's put salami on that base. And if we put salami on the base, it says, well, what if I grab ham and put it on top of that? Now before, salami ham was the same thing as ham salami, but this one says order does matter, so it's not the same. So I'm going to list salami ham as an option. Well, now what if I do salami, double the meats is not okay because repetition is not allowed. But what if I do salami and then I put turkey on top of that? That's a totally new sandwich. And then what if I do salami and I put roast beef on top of that? Again, totally new sandwich. And I've just exhausted all my options with salami. So now let's say we take turkey and put it as our base. Well, I can put turkey and then I can grab ham and put that on top. And even though that's been mentioned before, again, because order does matter, that's a totally new sandwich. So turkey ham is not the same thing as ham turkey. So what if I do turkey and I grab salami? Even though we feel like it's been mentioned before, order matters. So turkey salami is a completely different sandwich. And then turkey, double the meat, not okay, so I'm not going to list it. But then turkey roast beef is going to be an okay sandwich. And that exhausts all my options with turkey. Now, moving on to roast beef. So if I start with roast beef on that bottom layer and grab the ham, even though I feel like it's been mentioned here, it's a different order, and order matters, so it's a different sandwich. So if I put roast beef as my base and then I put salami on top, once again, even though it feels like it's been mentioned right here, it's a different sandwich. And then if I do my roast beef and I put my turkey on top of that, feels like it's here, but it's a different sandwich. And yet again, I cannot do roast beef because repetition is not allowed. So here's my list. And this time I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 ways that this one can happen. And so then in the final example, it says, all right, let's list all the ways that I can select 2 meats. If order does matter, yes, order does matter, and repetition is allowed, so double the meats is okay. Hopefully you're thinking, wow, this could get pretty hefty because anything goes at this point, and you're going to see that kind of is what happens. So let's say that I start with that ham. Again, and hopefully too you're noticing that I'm being very systematic in what I'm doing. If you're systematic, you'll knock this out and it'll be pretty easy for you to do if you'll just be systematic. So I'm going to start with that ham as my base. And remember, repetition is allowed, so ham is a perfectly fine sandwich here. But now, what if I do ham and I put salami on top of that? What if I do ham and I put turkey on top of that? And what if I do ham and I put roast beef on top of that? Okay, I've exhausted every option with ham. Moving on to salami now. So with salami, I can do salami and put ham on top of it. Feels like it's the same as this. Order does matter. So order mattering means that ham salami is not the same thing as salami ham. I've got to list it. And then what if I do salami and then I put salami on top of that? Repetition is allowed, so that's a perfectly fine sandwich. And then what if I do salami and I put turkey on top of that? Another fine sandwich. And then what if I do salami and put roast beef on top of that? Another fine sandwich. And that exhausts everything with salami. Now I'm going to say, let's grab turkey, put it on the bottom. I can put ham on top, even though it feels like I already did it. Flavor's the same to me. But for some people, in this case, that is not the same sandwich. And if I put turkey and then I put salami on top of that, again, feels like it's the same sandwich. It's really not. And what if I put turkey and double the meats? Doubling is okay because repetition is allowed. And what if I grab turkey and I put roast beef on top of that? So that exhausts everything with turkey. Now I'm moving on to roast beef. So I can do roast beef and put ham on top of that, even though I feel like it's here. Flavor's the same to me, but in this case it's not the same. And then what if I do roast beef and I put salami on top? What if I do roast beef and I put turkey on top? And what if I do roast beef and I double the meats? And there's all my options because I've exhausted everything in the list. And here is the list of all the ways that I can select 2 meats. Order doesn't matter, repetition is allowed, and you'll notice we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 ways that this one will happen. So as we examine what happened here, hopefully what you're noticing is as we progress through this, take a look back at the first example that we did. And in that first example, we restricted a lot of stuff. And we said, okay, order doesn't matter. And in a way that feels freeing, but it kind of restricts options because ham salami, now salami ham, it's all the same. So I cannot list extra types of sandwiches. It kind of restricts the type of sandwich. And then repetition not being allowed, you know that definitely restricts stuff. So then flip it over to the rest of it and notice too that we had 6 combinations there, 6 ways we can make those sandwiches. Now flipping over to this, we're lightening up on our restrictions because now we're saying, okay, order still doesn't matter. So ham, salami, salami, ham is the same thing. So even though it feels freeing, it restricts stuff. But repetition is allowed. Now we can throw in double the meats. We freed ourselves up. And you can see we went from 6 ways to 10 ways. And here again, now we're saying, okay, order does matter. And so even though that feels like it's restrictive, it actually frees us up to say ham salami and salami ham are different sandwiches. So I create more options here. And repetition not being allowed, well, that restricts a little bit. But look at this one down here. When suddenly we've opened up the doors and we've said, okay, order does matter. So ham salami and salami ham are not the same sandwich. We open up more combinations and now double the meats is okay. Look, we went all the way to 16 different combinations. The first one we had 6 combinations, then 10, then 12, then 16. We've increased our list tremendously. And so I point that out to simply say, and I'm going to write it down because it's significant enough that it should be in writing. And let me clear this out here so I can write it up on the board. Oh, pardon me, while the eraser is not working well at all here. I guess that means my marker is fantastic. Enjoy the scenery. Enjoy the background in sunny West Virginia. If only this was West Virginia. Then that would be great to be out on the beach and in the sun. But enjoy that scenery while I clean this up here. So, what I'm trying to say, and I'd say this is good enough, is that, let me write this up here, that when order does matter, remember that feels restrictive, but it's really not. It is not restrictive. And it increases the outcomes. In addition, when repetition is allowed, clearly that's not restrictive. It is not restrictive. And it increases the outcomes. Put a comma here, put a comma here, and let's clean up my terrible grammar there. It increases the outcomes. So that's what we witnessed in this example. Now, I want to take a look at a situation. Let me just go ahead and flip it. I want to take a look at a situation that allows us to create that sample space without listing out everything. Now, what you need to understand is that the method that's going to be used here is in a situation where order does matter tremendously. And the order that we list things, the order that we put things in makes a huge difference. Now, remember that will increase the outcomes. In other words, the combinations that can be made. So I want to show you a way that we can quickly get to this number of ways that we can create that list. Because this wasn't too bad. I had 4 meats to choose from and I was only selecting 2 at a time. That wasn't that bad. But what if I had a whole lot of meats to choose from and I was selecting way more than just 2 meats? This list could get really exhaustive and it could be difficult for me to work through this and come up. Like, what if I came up with 20 different ways to do this? And I don't want to list all 20 different ways. I just want to know how many ways it can happen. So what we have in that type of situation is what's called the fundamental counting principle. And the fundamental counting principle allows us to come up with just simply the number of ways that we can make these things happen. But we don't actually have to list all them out because there are times when that's all we want to know. It's just how many combinations can we make. I don't really need to know what the combinations are, just how many could I make happen. So, all right, now that I got the board cleaned up, and I'm so sorry about that, and I believe I am, yeah, at number 6 here. So, like I said, this is called the fundamental counting principle. And what the fundamental counting principle does is it allows us to determine the number of combinations that can be made. Or perhaps it would be better to say the number of outcomes. That would be a much better way to say it. The number of outcomes that can be made. And the other important thing to remember about that fundamental counting principle is that order matters. So it is used when order matters. In the arrangement. And here's how the fundamental counting principle works. Very simple. You determine the number of slots that need to be filled, or the number of items that need to be filled, and you count out that many slots, and then you simply multiply the numbers that go in each of those slots. And when you do that multiplication, that will tell you the number of outcomes that can come from that situation. So let me give you a couple of examples of this because I know this is kind of a strange concept. Flip this around here and get me some examples for you. All right, I seem to be having trouble with this black marker, so maybe I need to give that up and go with the blue marker. All right, it's racing a little bit better. We're settling in. I'll get that later. The black just really likes to stick to this board. All right. Clean as a whistle. Okay. So again, let me give you some some examples of this fundamental counting principle, and I left off here with D. So what we're going to do in these examples, and I've got 4 of them, we are going to find the number of possible outcomes for each situation. So let's take our first example. What happens in this one is we are selecting a committee of 4 people, and one is from each grade. And what's going to happen is we've got 5 freshmen to choose from, and we have 6 sophomores to choose from, and we've got 4 juniors to choose from, and finally we've got 3 seniors to choose from. So when we make this committee, and all we need to do here is, I don't necessarily need to know what the arrangements will look like. It's not like I know the names of these kids and I'm going to put them in order by their name. I just need to know, okay, how many possible arrangements could I make in this? So if I'm dealing with the possible arrangements, I'm going to use my fundamental counting principle, because order is going to matter tremendously here. In other words, if I put a freshman here, and then I put a sophomore here, it's not the same thing as a sophomore and a freshman like this. Order matters in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, how many seats do I have to fill? I've got 4 seats to fill because my committee has 4 people in it. So I'm going to have 4 slots in this. And I'm going to put numbers in each of these slots, and then I'm going to multiply those numbers together. So what I'm going to say is, okay, in this first slot, I'm going to choose from the freshmen. And I've got 5 freshmen to choose from. And then in my second option, okay, this is going to be my sophomores. I've got 6 sophomores to choose from. And in the next one with juniors, I got 4 juniors to choose from. And with my seniors, I got 3 seniors to choose from. And I'm going to multiply all these together. When I multiply all those numbers together, 5 times 6 is 30. 30 times 4 is 120, and 120 times 3 gives me 360. So I have 360 possibilities, or 360 possible outcomes for arranging these students on my committee of 4 people. All right, so let's try another one. Let's flip this around. See if it'll clear off here. Oh, much better. Okay. So in this case, this time I'm going to say we are going to choose a code name. That's going to consisting of a 1-digit number followed by a letter of the alphabet. And I have the same directions here. That what I want to do is I want to figure out, not so much list all the arrangements, but I just want to know how many combinations could I possibly make. So in this code, I've got 2 slots to fill because it says I'm going to have a 1-digit number, and after that 1-digit number, I'm going to have a letter of the alphabet. So I've got 2 slots to fill in this, and I'm going to multiply those numbers together. And what happens here is I'm going to say, okay, this 1-digit number right here, how many ways can I select a 1-digit number? Well, clearly, I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, no doubt about it. And everybody thinks, okay, there's 9 choices here because 10 is a 2-digit number. But don't forget, you could select 0 as your 1-digit number. So I actually have 10 possibilities for filling in that 1-digit number in this first slot. Now, in the letter of the alphabet, how many different letters of the alphabet could I choose? Well, there's 26 letters in the alphabet, so I'm going to put a 26 in here. Now I'm going to multiply those 2 numbers together, and 10 times 26 is 260. So I've got 260 possible outcomes when I make that code in this manner. All right, one more example. This example actually has 2 parts to it, so let me flip this around here. So I'm going to have the same directions that I don't necessarily need to list all these outcomes. I just want to know how many outcomes there are. How many different possibilities could I have? So in this case, what's going to happen is I am choosing a code again. A code name consisting of 2 1-digit numbers. Followed by 2 letters of the alphabet. So that means how many slots am I going to have? Absolutely, 4 slots. Now let's take a couple of conditions and throw them in this situation because we've not done that yet. Let's say that in the first case, repetition is not allowed. And this is important because let's take a look at the case where, okay, we've got 4 slots to fill. These are the 2 1-digit numbers, and then here's the letters of the alphabet. Well, if repetition is not allowed, then what that means is whatever number I select to put in here, 0 through 9, and remember that means I've got 10 options for this one. 0 through 9, whatever number I pick here, repetition is not allowed. So let's say I pick a 2 to put in here, that means I can't put a 2 in here. So what that means is I had 10 options here. I should have had 10 options here, but one of those ones that I selected, I can't use anymore. So now I don't have 10 options in here anymore. How many options do I have? Absolutely, I've reduced it by 1. So now let's look at this situation over here with the 2 letters of the alphabet. This one, I can pick any letter that I want. 26 options right there. But once I select that letter, I can't use it again. So now here, I should have had 26 options, but I don't have 26 options anymore because I took one of them out. So I've reduced it, like absolutely, down to 25. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply all those numbers together, and when I multiply all that out, I get 58,500 possible outcomes. Let me do this. Lots of outcomes there. But now let's switch the game up a little bit. This time, let's say, okay, repetition is allowed. So I have the same situation where I've got this code, 4 slots in that code. So 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to multiply all those numbers together. And I'm going to put a 1-digit number here. I've got 10 options. But if repetition is allowed and I put a 2 in there, that means I can repeat the 2. I can do it again. So I've not restricted my options. I'm back to 10 choices again. And now letters of the alphabet, 26. But if repetition is allowed, then if I choose a D, I can do a D again here. I've not restricted. I've not shrunk my options. And I still have 26 options there. Now when I multiply all those numbers out, I get 67,600 possible outcomes. And like we said before, there we go. Like we said before, repetition being allowed increases our options, and we saw that happen right here. So hopefully this helps you to understand the idea of creating a sample space and listing out options and what repetition means and what order means. And then hopefully you understand how the counting principle works, the fundamental counting principle works to allow us to determine how many possible outcomes we get. And like I said before, I don't need to know what they are. I don't need to list them. I just need to know how many. All right, you have a great day.